China's latest deep space transmission arrived without warning, carrying a compressed packet of raw optical data that stunned the senior analysts awake in the Beijing Aerospace Command Center. The images, though grainy and dark, contained enough clarity to ignite a chain reaction of alarm that raced across every secured channel in the building. For months, both China and NASA had tracked interstellar object 3I/ATLAS with cautious fascination, but nothing, not its strange tumbling orbit, not its peculiar coloration, not its irregular thermal output, had prepared them for what these new frames revealed. The Chinese probe Tianwen 6 had snapped the images at a distance far closer than any American craft had ever approached, exposing details NASA had either never shared or never seen. The first image alone was enough to freeze the chief astronomer, a ridge on the object's night side reflecting a rigid, unnatural geometry that no cometary body should possess. It was not jagged, it was not curved, it was a squared, stepped surface, almost like a fractured terrace carved into the stone of a forgotten temple. The probe's second image was even more unsettling. A set of shallow grooves, perfectly parallel and consistent in depth, ran along the object's exterior in a pattern unmistakably deliberate. They resembled the ancient cuneiform channels etched into Sumerian clay tablets, patterned, repeating, and too precise to be geological accidents. The analysts recalled the earlier discoveries from the Iraqi desert, including the impossible inscriptions found beneath the sands in the secret tomb tied to Gilgamesh. That memory cast a dark shadow across the room as everyone realized the eerie similarity. A low murmur filled the air as technicians enhanced the images line by line. Pixels sharpened, contrast deepened. The ridges gleamed with metallic undertones that no known interstellar rock possessed. A faint latticework appeared beneath the dust coating, thin, angular supports like the skeleton of an engineered frame. The silence of the control room collapsed into chaos as everyone demanded answers at once. Within minutes, China's highest-ranking science officials were scrambling to secure the data behind reinforced firewalls. The question that followed was whispered like a curse. Why did NASA never show this? For over a year, America had been the first to receive high-resolution radar mapping of 3I/ATLAS, thanks to the deep space sensor arrays that had detected the object almost immediately after its entry into the solar system. NASA's public statements were bland and carefully worded, describing the object as an elongated interstellar fragment with unusual reflectivity. No mention of geometric structures, no mention of patterns, nothing remotely like what China had just uncovered. China's leadership demanded a confidential review of every NASA press release, memo, and scientific preprint. Suspicion hardened into certainty. Either NASA had concealed information or they had not looked closely enough. Neither option was comforting. When the leaked Chinese images reached the global scientific community through an anonymous source posting them to a closed astrophysics forum, the reaction was instant and explosive. Experts who had once scoffed at theories of ancient alien architectures on interstellar rocks now struggled to explain the symmetry in the images. The grooves on 3I/ATLAS were unlike any known impact striations. The reflective lattice was too uniform. The steps carved into the stone were far too straight. Within hours, the images spread across encrypted servers, then onto conspiracy channels, then finally into mainstream media broadcasts. China officially denied releasing them, but the world was already awake, demanding explanations from the one agency expected to answer: NASA. NASA's denial came quickly. A spokesperson insisted the American agency had never observed anything resembling architectural features. They attributed the Chinese images to possible artifacting, sensor distortion, or compression anomalies. But the tone was unconvincing, too rehearsed, too defensive, and China's astronomers were not having it. In an emergency broadcast, China revealed 3 more frames captured by Tianwen 6. These were clearer, brighter, and impossible to dismiss. The object's underside, hidden from Earth-based telescopes by its rotation, showed a sprawling, dish-shaped indentation, symmetrical and smooth. It looked disturbingly like the concave hull of a vessel, eroded and coated in aeons of interstellar dust. This time, even NASA fell silent. The scientific arguments that followed were fierce and desperate. Some researchers insisted the indentation was a natural feature produced by erosion from cosmic rays and particle winds. Others pointed out that natural erosion never produced concentric rings spiraling inward like the ones faintly visible within the cavity. These rings matched nothing in planetary geology, but were eerily similar to the nested circular layouts discovered in ancient Mesopotamian diagrams, the same ones associated with the myths surrounding the Anunnaki. The deeper analysts looked, the more correlations they found between the Atlas grooves and the cuneiform motifs linked to the legendary stories of celestial visitors. The resemblance was disturbing, almost mocking, as though the object had been deliberately engraved with symbols humanity had encountered once before, thousands of years ago. As international pressure mounted, NASA reluctantly released archived radar scans of Atlas taken months prior. Though the scans were low resolution, they did show anomalies, patches of unusually smooth surface areas inconsistent with a natural object. NASA attempted to explain these as potential ice deposits. Independent analysts disagreed, noting the reflectivity patterns didn't match frozen volatiles at all. By now, global suspicion had turned into outright hostility. Accusations flew across press conferences, accusing NASA of deliberate omission. American officials insisted the Chinese images were manipulated, but then China invited an international panel of astrophysicists to examine the raw telemetry from the Tianwen 6 probe. The panel verified its authenticity within hours. At this point, the world was left with a terrifying conclusion. 3I/ATLAS was not what humanity had assumed. The probe's fourth data dump contained something even more remarkable. Embedded in the grooves was a faint luminescence, tiny pulses of reflected ultraviolet light that flickered in rhythmic intervals. When analysts converted the pulses into a spectrographic timeline, the intervals matched numerical sequences too precise to be random. The pulses repeated in a pattern that mirrored prime numbers. The object was signaling. No natural body emitted structured ultraviolet pulses with mathematical significance, especially not a body that was supposedly a tumbling fragment of ice and rock. The implication was horrifying. Something inside or on the surface of 3I/ATLAS was functioning, or at least attempting to function, even in its deteriorated state. China urged immediate global cooperation to investigate further. NASA requested additional time to review the new claims. Privately, America scrambled to determine why its own deep space sensors had never detected the pulses, or if they had. Inside NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a small group of engineers conducted a covert analysis of archived telemetry from early tracking stages. After a frantic 12-hour review, they found something subtle but devastating. A faint ultraviolet anomaly embedded in their own recordings, dismissed months earlier as instrument noise. NASA had missed or ignored the same signal. Meanwhile, Tianwen 6 maneuvered to capture even closer images. The new frames revealed that the grooves across the surface converged near the object's hollow underside, aligning into a pattern that resembled a spiraling pathway. Engineers compared it to an access shaft or aperture partially buried under layers of debris. In one image, a sharp glint emerged, too polished, too reflective, like exposed metal. China's scientists speculated that the object might be a derelict probe, a fragment of a lost vessel, or a drifting relic from a civilization predating human history by eons. And then came the frame that electrified the world, a panel-like structure, cracked along its edge, revealing interior struts arranged with the clear logic of engineering. It was unmistakable evidence of construction. NASA finally broke. They admitted the possibility that Atlas was not entirely natural. They even acknowledged that earlier scans had shown unexplained regularities. But they maintained they had no high-resolution imagery comparable to China's. The public backlash was immediate. Protests erupted around NASA headquarters. Accusations of global deception flooded social platforms. But beneath the chaos, classified meetings between American and Chinese officials intensified. Both nations feared what the object might represent, not only scientifically, but politically. If this was a vessel, who built it? How old was it? And was it drifting aimlessly, or was its arrival intentional? The object's trajectory deepened the mystery. Atlas was not following a path typical of interstellar debris. It had executed a subtle but measurable course correction months before entering the solar system, a shift so slight that only advanced analysis detected it. Neither NASA nor China had initially recognized the correction for what it was. Objects do not self-correct unless guided. As the world's telescopes turned toward ATLAS, Tianwen 6 descended for its closest pass yet, skimming barely kilometers above the surface. The probe captured the clearest image to date, a square opening partially sealed by debris, revealing a chamber inside the object. The chamber was dark, but its walls reflected a faint internal material that resembled alloy plating. The structure of the chamber was unmistakably artificial. Moments after transmitting the image, Tianwen 6's signal flickered. Then it went dead. Global networks erupted into panic. China dispatched emergency commands, attempting to re-establish contact, but the probe remained silent. Speculation spiraled. Had the probe been damaged by debris? Had it crashed? Or had something inside the object interfered with its systems? NASA expressed formal condolences but quietly celebrated the sudden leveling of technological advantage. China vowed to send Tianwen 7 immediately, but the real shock came 4 days later. A new ultraviolet pulse sequence emitted from Atlas, stronger, clearer, and composed of more complex intervals. Analysts converted the intervals into binary, the binary into patterns, the patterns into crude imagery. What emerged was chilling. A set of symbols almost identical to those found carved into the ancient tomb beneath Iraqi sands, the one associated with the impossible legends tied to Gilgamesh. Symbols humanity had once dismissed as mythological or ceremonial, but here they were, in interstellar space, pulsing from a drifting alien relic. The implications were incomprehensible. Someone or something had once visited Earth, or humanity had encountered remnants of their technology long before recording history, or the stories preserved in clay tablets were not stories at all, but distorted memories of encounters rewritten across millennia. China released the translated pulse sequences publicly, igniting a global frenzy. NASA tried to downplay the connection, but researchers across the world noticed the undeniable parallels, the spiraling symbols, the intersecting angles, the repeating tri-line patterns that represented gate, journey, or descent in ancient Sumerian texts. And then the final pulse came. It was not mathematical, it was not symbolic, it was a coordinate pointing not to Earth, but to a region beyond Jupiter, an empty void of space humanity had never explored in detail. China immediately proposed a joint mission to investigate. NASA hesitated, insisting on further verification, but everyone felt the same weight. Atlas had given humanity a direction, a destination, a message of intent. Was it a meeting point? A warning? A call? Before anyone could interpret the meaning, Atlas began rotating faster, much faster. Its glow intensified. Its hollow underside emitted a faint radiation that matched no known natural signature. The object, silent for eons, seemed to be awakening. Space agencies urged caution. News networks speculated about alien activation. Religious groups declared it a divine omen, but scientists recognized something else. The acceleration was a precursor to ejection. Atlas was preparing to leave the solar system. In its final hours within observational range, Atlas emitted a long, continuous ultraviolet beam aimed directly toward the coordinate it had transmitted. It was a final gesture, a fixed finger pointing towards something waiting in the darkness. Then, the object surged forward, its acceleration unnatural, propelled by forces no human engine could replicate. It burned with a white-blue radiance as it exited the heliosphere, vanishing into interstellar night. Humanity was left standing at the threshold of revelation, holding fragments of truth older and more transformative than any discovery in history. Someone out there had left a relic drifting between stars. Someone out there had visited Earth long before history. Someone out there had sent a message across space. And now, they had told humanity where to go next. Whether the destination was an invitation or a trap remained unknown. But world powers agreed on one thing. Humanity could no longer pretend it was alone. A multinational mission was drafted in secret. Funding surged. Designs accelerated. A craft was prepared. Faster, stronger, capable of reaching the coordinates beyond Jupiter. The mission was to investigate, to discover, to confront whatever ATLAS had pointed toward. Some feared humanity would find nothing, others feared humanity would find everything. But everyone knew the same truth. NASA had not been hiding what was on ATLAS. Atlas had been hiding something from NASA and from all of humanity. And now, the universe was finally calling back. The preparations for the mission began under a shroud of unprecedented secrecy. Nations that had been geopolitical rivals for decades suddenly found themselves forced into reluctant cooperation, pulled together by a fear far greater than their differences. Behind closed doors, ambassadors, scientists, and military officials argued over every detail. Who would lead the mission? Who would control the telemetry? Who would decide what information would be made public? And who would take responsibility should the mission lead to catastrophe? China insisted that the coordinates belonged to them first. NASA countered that they had been monitoring the object before anyone else. Europe demanded transparency. Russia and India, sensing the magnitude of the discovery, pushed aggressively for equal participation. But beneath the surface of the diplomatic chaos was a cold realization shared by every delegation. None of them were prepared for what might be waiting in that region of space. The engineers assembling the spacecraft, codenamed Ascendant, worked around the clock. Hydrogen-layered radiation shields, adaptive hull plating, enhanced ultraviolet receivers, and experimental deep space scanners were installed in record time. The propulsion system, based on plasma drives that had only been tested in simulations, was pushed far beyond its original design parameters. Everyone understood the urgency. Everyone understood the stakes. The first crew briefing was held in a dimly lit auditorium beneath a classified aerospace installation. The chosen candidates, astronauts, cosmonauts, taikonauts, and specialists from 6 different nations, sat in tense silence as high-ranking officials revealed the full, unfiltered set of Tianwen 6 images. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the most composed mission commanders struggled to hide their alarm as the engineered lattice, the spiraling grooves, and the unmistakable chamber appeared on the projector. Then came the ultraviolet pulse sequences. When translated into binary and overlaid into imagery, the symbols flickered across the screen. Ancient, impossibly familiar, and dangerously evocative. One astronaut whispered that they looked like warnings. Another said they looked like instructions. A third asked the question on everyone's mind: why send symbols humans could recognize unless whoever sent them knew humanity would eventually see them? The scientists in the room had no comforting answer. As launch day approached, the world's media speculated wildly. China maintained an official silence. NASA refused interviews. The public sensed a growing dread, but clung desperately to speculation and conjecture. Religious leaders urged caution. Activists protested the mission entirely, fearing humanity was intruding into something sacred or forbidden. Others cheered, believing the mission would mark the dawn of a new era of cosmic understanding. Then a new dataset arrived from the Chinese Deep Space Monitoring Array. It contained a faint, lingering ultraviolet pulse that had escaped detection initially. When decoded, it formed not a coordinate, but a short sequence of symbols. Symbols that did not match any known Sumerian inscription. Linguists struggled to interpret them, but one pattern stood out. A tri-line convergence that resembled warning glyphs found in the desert tomb's sealed inner chamber. The one plastered on the stone door that archaeologists had sealed shut, believing it was too dangerous to open. Some feared the message meant "do not follow." Others argued it meant "prepare." A few suggested it meant "only seekers may enter." But the consensus was chilling. The signal was sent intentionally after Tianwen 6 vanished. Something had reacted. Something had responded. The world held its breath. When Ascendant launched from its classified site, only selected individuals were allowed to witness the ignition. The craft rose on a pillar of glowing plasma, tearing a path toward the cosmos with a speed unmatched by any vessel built before. Every control center across the participating nations monitored the ascent, watching as telemetry stabilized and the propulsion systems engaged for the long burn beyond Mars and toward the dark, hollow region of space near Jupiter's outer orbit. By the time Ascendant passed the asteroid belt, the ultraviolet emissions from the target coordinates grew stronger. The pulses were no longer faint, fading remnants. They were rhythmic, organized, intentional. Each sequence increased in complexity, almost as if something out there was aware of the approaching craft. Then, without warning, a new pattern emerged. This was not symbolic. It was a waveform, a modulation resembling vocalization. Engineers scrambled to decode it. Linguists strained to identify its structure. Cryptographers attempted to convert it into mathematical patterns, but none of the attempts yielded anything recognizable until a waveform analyst noticed something horrifying. The modulation matched the harmonic frequency of the pulse sequences found carved into the burial platform beneath the sands of Iraq, the same platform associated with the alleged resting place of Gilgamesh. It matched the resonance pattern in the chamber's stone ceiling. It matched the irregular vibrations that had caused the collapse of one of the tunnels during excavation. It matched the tomb. Ascendant pressed onward. As the spacecraft neared the coordinate region, sensors detected an anomaly, an absence of particulate matter, as though something had cleared a perfect spherical region of space spanning thousands of kilometers. A void where dust, fragments, and micrometeorites simply did not exist. Nothing natural could create such a phenomenon. The crew stared through the observation bay's reinforced viewport, expecting to see a planet, a structure, a glowing beacon, anything. Instead, they saw nothing, a pure, perfect darkness. Then their instruments began to fail. Ultraviolet receivers flickered, radiation monitors spiked erratically, the magnetic field sensors oscillated wildly, detecting patterns with periodicity too deliberate to be random. The crew attempted to adjust their trajectory, but the craft's navigation slowly drifted off its intended path, drawn toward the center of the void. Inside mission control, alarms blared as engineers attempted to override the drift. Commands were sent. Engine bursts were triggered, thrusters fired, nothing changed. Ascendant continued toward the darkness, locked onto a gravity gradient no one understood. Then the void rippled. It did not glow. It did not rotate. It simply shifted, like fabric moving underwater. And from its edge emerged something faint, a glimmering, curved surface that reflected starlight with the unmistakable sheen of metal. The crew froze. Mission control lost its breath. Everyone understood instantly what they were seeing. It was not a planet. It was not an asteroid. It was not a natural formation. It was a structure, enormous, silent, waiting. The surface bore the same spiraling channels seen on Atlas, only now larger, deeper, more intricate. Lines converged into nodal points. Geometric depressions formed networks like circuitry across a hull stretching farther than the spacecraft's sensors could map. The structure extended into the darkness, disappearing into the void as if embedded within it. Then a pulse erupted, not from the structure, but from inside the crew's headsets. A faint hum, a rhythmic tremor, a sequence of rising frequencies matching the prime number pulses originally transmitted by Atlas. This time, however, the pulses were layered with harmonic undertones, tones that seemed almost like words half-formed, as though an ancient voice was speaking through modulation rather than language. The crew recorded every second. Analysts back on Earth attempted live translation, but the pulse was not meant for humanity's ears. It was meant for the void. The structure responded. Panels shifted like unlocking vault doors. Segmented plates rotated in silence. Light, cold, pale, artificial, leaked from the seams. The void rippled again, and suddenly the darkness vanished, revealing the true scale of the construct. It was a station, or a vessel, or a tomb. Ascendant was pulled closer. Panic erupted on the bridge. Commands were shouted, thrusters roared, but no human technology could overpower the grip of the gravitational corridor pulling them inward. The craft passed beneath a colossal arch of engraved metal, identical to the glyphs unearthed in the Iraqi tomb. The same symbols, the same markings, the same tri-line signature denoting passage. A gateway. Humanity had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Inside the structure, the void disappeared completely. Light emanated from thin slits carved into the walls, illuminating a chamber so massive it dwarfed anything constructed by human hands. Patterns pulsed along the walls like synchronized circuits. Machinery hummed beneath the floor. The air, impossible in a vacuum, vibrated with energy. The crew floated in stunned silence as Ascendant drifted deeper into the chamber, guided by forces unknown. A sense of ancient, catastrophic purpose filled the air. The chamber's heart glowed faintly ahead, shaped like a spherical core suspended in a lattice of silver tendrils. The pulses intensified. The crew felt them in their bones. Back on Earth, Mission Control watched in helpless dread as telemetry transformed into indecipherable symbols. Video feeds began to distort. Audio returned only static intertwined with that haunting harmonic resonance. Then the core opened. Inside lay something the cameras could only partially capture, an object shaped like a capsule, engraved with the same spiraling pathways found on ATLAS. But this capsule was whole, untouched, preserved. A voice, not audible, but present, seemed to fill the chamber, vibrating through metal, through machinery, through flesh. A resonance that felt ancient, purposeful, patient. The capsule flickered with internal light. The oldest myths on Earth whispered of beings who descended from the heavens, who forged kings, who taught humanity the written word. Those myths were dismissed as fantasy, but the capsule told a different story. The chamber told a different story. The void told a different story. And humanity, trembling in the heart of an ancient construct older than civilization itself, finally understood. Atlas was never the message. It was only the messenger. The message was here, waiting.